following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back. I've got the Fab Four with me. I'm Ralph Tycho, the Tokin Jew in Alameda, California, and I'm blessed. I talk about my show, my podcast, as describing it as I have the most interesting people on the planet show up as guests and guest hosts and co-hosts and this, that, and the other thing. Today is certainly no exception. The Fab Four, Alan Blumkin. How are you, Alan?
Okay. Hello there, everybody. This is Mel Allen.
The live version of Mel Allen, Melvin Israel Allen from the South. Amazing how many broadcasters came out of the South. We could talk about that and a myriad of other things with David Hubler, too.
Yes, hi, good evening, everybody. And just to let you know, I'm wearing my mask to protect you all.
Okay. Is it a catcher's mask? Is it Charlie Silvera's mask?
Yeah, my Charlie Silvera autographed mask.
Yeah. He gladly let you keep the baseball, so why wouldn't he autograph a mask for you?
He never used it. Really?
Okay. All right. Yes, that's true. Also here is George Case III. George, how are you?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Ralph.
Pleasure to have you, along with Hal Bock, Associated Press. How are
Hi,
you?
everybody. I'm good. And I want you to know that I still have my son's hockey mask from when he played Pee Wee hockey. And he's now contemplating retirement from the NLRB. So that's an old mask.
Okay, well, that mask was a Jacques Plant mask. Am I correct?
That is correct. It's a Jacques Plant manufactured mask.
And it was probably, I'm guessing, the number 2?
The last to wear a mask?
Well,
one of the first.
Plant, of course, was the first NHL goalie in the modern age to go to the mask, and he thought it was such a good idea that he started a company that would manufacture masks. And my son, who was about 8 years old at the time, saw an ad, and he said, "Dad, I got to have that mask," because he was a goalie. I got to have that mask. So I ordered the mask, and it came in the mail, and it was the receipt on the mask was sales receipt number 2. Now, I don't know who got number 1, but I got number 2. And I still have that mask. It's a memento that I'll always keep.
Beautiful, beautiful. You know, one time, just so I could renew a smile on my face that's always been there, would you explain where you and your dad were when Bobby Thompson hit the home run, and tell me about dancing around the living room?
Well, here's what happened. I came home from school. It was a day game, and I came home from school, and I found out that the Giants were losing in the ninth inning, and they were losing 4-1, I guess it was. And I was really annoyed. And because they had come so far and it had been such a great season, and here we were in the last game, in the last inning, and they were going to lose. So I just sat down and I started looking at a newspaper, which is what I always do. I always did, and I always will, and I always do. And I'm reading the newspaper. And my father was sitting in the kitchen listening on the radio to Russ Hodges' call. And I could hear from the other room the progress of that ninth inning. And as it was progressing, I was turning the pages of the newspaper, and I was just praying that I didn't run out of pages, because I was very convinced that I was helping them along with the pages turning. And next thing I know, I hear Russ Hodges yelling, "The Giants win the pennant! The Giants win the pennant!" And I jumped up and I ran into the kitchen, and my father was dumbfounded. And I grabbed him and we started dancing, the two of us dancing around the kitchen with just the greatest expression of joy that a father and son could ever have. And it was just a marvelous moment. I'll never forget it because it was a bonding moment to have gone through that whole season and to win the pennant on the last day, on the last inning, on a home run. It was a marvelous moment for me and for my father.
Wow. Hey, let me tell you about a bonding moment I had with my mother. And George Case, listen up on this one. 1956, I come home from school to watch the final 2 innings of Don Lawson's perfect game. And my mom is there with his Twinkies, as usual. And we're watching. And I had no idea that there would be a connect that would last 70 years in my life in this instance. But my mother tells me that during the game that in 1949, she and her girlfriend, another 19-year-old kid from Mount Kisco, took the train into New York because my grandfather copped some tickets. That was the expression. We copped some tickets to the game. And my mother got to see Lou Gehrig's speech. And the connection there is that lining up on third base line or the first base line, I don't remember which. No, I do remember. It's the first base line, and there is a clear picture of George Case watching Lou Gehrig's speech along with my mother from wherever. Yeah, I like to think of it right behind home plate, but could have been anywhere, just that she was there. At the same time, George Case, whose son is absolutely George's biggest fan. Not my mother's biggest fan. So, George Case, talk about that day.
Well, I'll tell you what, Ralph, you bring back a lot of memories. And a matter of fact, I'm looking right now in my office at that photograph. It's a photograph that was taken a little bit different angle. A photographer who apparently knew my father and took the photograph. It's Lou Gehrig in his profile, and the second player in the background on the right-hand side is my dad. So that's a very interesting photo. And matter of fact, I had a guy today just wanted to buy a copy of it. I said, yeah, I have the copies. You can't have the original, but I have the copies. But that was July 4th, 1939 at Yankee Stadium. It was between games of a doubleheader between the Yankees and Washington. And, it was something that I think I mentioned earlier. One of my, very early memories is hearing my father talk about, being on the field with Lou Gehrig. That day, my dad played against Lou Gehrig. They knew one another. So, that was interesting. And also, and this was not known to me until a couple of years ago, a SABR researcher, April 30th, 1939 was the last at-bat Lou Gehrig had in his major league career, and my father caught a fly ball that Lou hit to center field, and of course at the time no one knew that was going to be the last ball that he hit in his major league career, but he would retire 2 days later in Detroit on May 2nd of 39, which would bring to an end his consecutive game streak of 2,130 games. So I've also been asked to do some things for ALS, which is called Lou Gehrig's disease, and raise some funds for it. So, I feel really a personal connection with my father and Lou Gehrig. So, Ralph, I do appreciate you mentioning that, because that was a very eventful day in my dad's life.
Well, you know what? I'm going to take it one step further in a connect between my mother and your dad. In 1961, when your dad was coaching third base for the newly formed Washington Senators 2, I call them. It was the expansion team, and Chuck Hinton was the star. I remember that day because we went to Washington, and instead of taking the train like I wanted to do, my parents made me fly, and I was really flight adverse. But in return, they said we could go see the Yankees play, and the cab driver took us to the Yankee game and to the Washington Senator Park and the Yankee game. And I remember the cab driver saying, 61 Yankees, they're like a machine. Well, they're incredibly great. Maris, Manor, Yogi was still good. Tremendous years that year. And my mother didn't know she was watching George Case for the second time in her life. It might have been the second baseball game she ever attended in person. But there you go. So I've always felt an affinity that way for you, George. I've never met anyone in any walk of life who had so much respect and love for their father. And you're to be commended. I wish I could have met him.
Well, Ralph, I appreciate those comments. It's very nice of you to say those things. My dad was a tremendous athlete, great ball player, but he was even a better person. And, I try to honor his memory by, talking about World War II era baseball. I mean, so many wonderful experiences I had because of my father. And it's a pleasure for me to talk about baseball history on these podcasts. And, I don't mean to bore people, but on the other hand, a lot of what I experienced were experiences that my father had talked to me about it as a youngster, and, something that I've enjoyed, bringing his life to the history of the game that he was involved in during World War II, because it was a very special time, and it was a time that the country wasn't sure what the outcome was going to be or whether baseball was even going to be played. But the fact that FDR, as President of the United States, got involved, did what they call the green light letter, and gave the okay for baseball to keep playing, to keep a sense of normalcy in the terrible times that the United States and the world was going through with regard to World War II. So, I'm pretty much well versed on that whole era, and I enjoy sharing, my memories with everyone.
Yeah, believe me, we do too. Before I get to David Hubler's memories, I want to talk to Alan Blumkin a little bit. What is it that if you were asked one day at a ballpark, like there was a book, A Day in the Bleachers by Arnold Himmel, and I was fortunate enough to have interviewed him a while back, and he was in his 90s and still as sharp as a tack. And you guys are no spring chickens, all of us. So that we are as sharp as we are makes me proud to be a producer, and it can happen. You can reach any age as long as you have your safety. And it isn't bad. Life's a trade-off. It's never going to be the same physically, but mentally, as long as you have that brain going. And Al, you said you still read the fucking paper you still read the paper every day. Am I correct?
Yeah, and one of the things I started doing because I used to be fairly good in crosswords, but after I had the problems in 2014, I stopped. And about 6 weeks ago, I decided to subscribe online to the New York Times crossword puzzle. So I do it every day, and I found out that I'm getting better and better the longer I do it. It's starting to come back to me. I'm not nearly as good as I was when I stopped, almost 10 years ago. But I find it very, very challenging, and it helps me keep my mind going. Now, I had a different experience because my parents couldn't care less about baseball. I got into it through the cards, collecting the cards in the magazines back then, in the early 50s, and my parents took me to a game, my first game at Yankee Stadium in September 1953. They took me for my birthday to Memorial Day doubleheader at Yankee Stadium in 1954, and they took me to the Polo Grounds for a Dodger Giant game in 1955, and then I was 12, okay, and then that fall after I came back from camp, a friend of mine and I, we would take a bus and 2 trains from Queens to get up to Yankee Stadium to go to ball games in the afternoon. And back then in 1955, you could do that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and but
today it would be child neglect.
Forget it. Yeah. Anyway, one of the nicest things that I when Yogi, it was announced that Yogi Berra was coming back to Yankee Stadium for the first time in 14 years after he had that fallout with Steinbrenner because of the way Steinbrenner fired him in 1985, 16 games into the season. So I rounded up 3 friends. We went up there, and Don Larson threw out the first ball to Yogi. This is after they had a ceremony for Yogi, and they gave him all these gifts and everything. And that was the day David Cohn pitched his perfect game.
Well,
if it wasn't for Yogi Berra Day, I probably wouldn't have gone up there. But I went up there and I actually sat through a perfect game.
Yeah, Alan, I was a Met fan, as you know, when Yogi and Warren Spahn became Mets. It took me a long time to adjust, especially Yogi, in anything but a Yankee uniform. Years later, when he was an Astro coach, I blanked.
Yeah.
I didn't even try to adjust to that. Just kept the radio on and the television off. That was a strange look.
And speaking of that, one of the great thrills I had was August 1985 when I was at Yankee Stadium with a bunch of friends to see Tom Seaver win his 300th game. He came in with the White Sox and pitched a complete game and won game number 300. And as I tell people, the only game I regret not going to in the last 10, 12 years was the Derek Jeter 3,000 hit game because I was in California for the Sabre convention when that happened. But I also saw an unassisted triple play. I've seen 5 final games of World Series. I saw Mazeroski's home run, which is a story in itself. And I went to tons of games between the 60s and the early 2000s, and I've seen so many things at ball games that over the years that because I was always ready to go.
Okay.
Well, you know what Casey Stengel. You know what Casey Stengel said. Come to the ballpark, you'll see something you never saw before.
Yeah,
and
one of my favorite Stengel stories was Gene. They got Gene when he was managing the Mets in 1962. They got Gene Woodling, who was with the expansion Washington Senators. And Woodling is sitting next to Stengel in the dugout watching the 62 Mets lose another one. And Stengel turns to Woodling and says, "Ain't like the old days, is it?"
and there weren't. Before David Hubler, I'll ask Hal Bock one question that I've tried to think of on the air for a long time. Was there ever a time when you were reporting when you found it difficult to be objective because of your fandom?
No, because my job was to be objective, and I was.
Okay.
Now, I allow myself in retirement to root and cheer and so forth, but not when I was working, no. My job was to report the game, and that's what I did. No. The answer to your question is an emphatic no.
Okay. Was there ever a time you bent over backwards not to, where you thought later, boy, I really bent over backwards not to appear to be a fan?
Well, sure. First of all, I was always a National League fan because of the Giants as a kid growing up, so I rooted for the National League teams. And that would mean that when the Giants and Dodgers left town, I was left with nobody until the Mets were invented. So I more or less felt a warm feeling for the Mets. And when they won the World Series in 1969, and when they won the World Series in 1986, I felt good. I enjoyed that. I liked that they won. But I didn't let it impact on my reporting and on my writing. I wrote the story. I wrote what happened and how it happened and why it happened. And inside, sure, I was happy for them because they were my team. And I felt good about it, but I didn't let it creep into my copy.
Okay. David Hubler, your first experience at Yankee Stadium.
Well, my first experience at Yankee Stadium was in 1951. I went with my father. It was our first game, my first game. And we were sitting at, I think, behind home plate, but in the upper deck. And I remember him telling me, before the game began, he was pointing out the various areas of the game. And he said, back there, out there, that's where Joe DiMaggio plays. And I looked at it. And, having spent a couple of years as a youngster just listening to games on radio, we didn't have a television early on. And so it was a totally new experience just to see the vastness of Yankee Stadium and to know that one guy, Joe DiMaggio, who, of course, I knew, and in fact, I'm looking at his picture right now with me, which I'll never give up. The house burns down, I'm taking that picture with me. So that was the interesting thing I realized later on, of course, and I guess my father did too, was that in right field was a young rookie by the name of Mickey Mantle playing for his first season. So that was my first real remembrance of going to a game. But one other memory that stands out in my mind is when I was in high school, this was like 57 or so, I was interested in writing for the school paper. As it turned out, I failed the school writing test. And I never let the faculty advisor never let it get past him. I always kidded him about that. But anyway, so I tried to get some kind of story. So I arranged, and I forget how I did this, but I arranged to go down to the Concourse Plaza Hotel, which is where the single Yankees were staying, and maybe some of the married men too, I don't know. But to interview a new rookie by the name of Bobby Richardson. And this was the first time I actually interviewed a professional athlete. So I went down there with a friend of mine because I didn't want to do this on my own. And I rang up to the room, and they said, "Come on up." And I went into the room with my friend, and there was Richardson, of course, waiting for me. And slouching around on the bed was Tony Kubek, and on the other bed was Bobby Shantz, Yankee pitcher.
Wow.
And I mean, I was in awe. I mean, this was almost beyond belief. I did a nice little interview with him, and it's the first time I think I ever met somebody from South Carolina.
Hey, David, I don't know if you're free at 6:00 Eastern this Friday. If so,
yeah.
Are you?
That's the 22nd?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess so, sure.
Okay, call this number again because I have as a guest a fellow by the name of Robbie Richardson, his child. And you could help me interview him.
Bobby Richardson's son?
Yes.
Oh, okay, I'll make a note of that.
Okay.
And
beautiful.
I tell you, as a postscript to this, every time thereafter, I did the interview. Every time thereafter, when I went to Yankee Stadium, I would spend a little time behind the Yankee dugout, even though that's not where I was sitting. And I'd say hello to him, and he'd say, "Hello, how you doing? And so, how's your friend?" That sort of thing. And it was like that. In fact, up until like 1986, when they used to play for about 2 or 3 years, they had the Crackerjack All-Star game in D.C. They were trying to drum up.
Right, I remember that.
And Bobby Richardson came and played. And I went out and we started to talk, and the rains came down like a torrential rain in the Philippines. And so we never got to really talk very much, but that was the last time he and I sort of got together after that initial interview. So
well, I'm sure his son will be delighted to hear, because that was many, many years ago, and so we will talk then. And I just want to tell you guys what a tremendous podcast this was, and how happy I am with
Ralph, I've got one more story. Ralph,
sure.
if you have the time, I have one more story. David just brought this up. In 1985, I managed to spend 4 hours interviewing Dick Rote. It's a long story. He was doing the broadcasting for the Pitt basketball games, and a friend of mine introduced me to him when they were playing Seton Hall, and when they came in to play St. John's, I went out to the hotel and spent several hours with him, and this led to the first Sabre presentation I ever did, and it got me over the fear of public speaking. Because when I did it the first time, I had no idea what kind of a reception I was going to get. And then people, after it was over, the meeting was over, people said how much they liked it. So I took it out to the conference in Oakland that year. And I did it, and I wasn't nervous at all. I was never nervous doing public speaking after that first time.
Wow.
And he was very forthcoming.
I would never have imagined that you ever in your life had trouble expressing yourself, or trouble with public or private speaking. Alan, you've come a long way.
Yeah, public speaking. But after that, And I ran a couple of his Sabre trivia contests in the early 2000s, and I became a comedian. And but he was very consistent, because several months later I read an interview with him in a magazine called Sports Collectors Digest, and was totally consistent with what he told me.
Wow.
You should have pitched it to the magazine. You would have been the first one.
Yeah, and he, when I sent him a thank you card after he gave me his address, I sent him a thank you card. I was up in Cooperstown, and I made a copy of a box score when he was playing with the Fort Wayne Pistons, and there was a game where he got 26 points against the Knicks. This is before the shot clock.
Well, wow. People forget he was a legitimate star. And what was it? Who was it? Branch Rickey?
Yeah, Branch Rickey told me that Branch Rickey, because when he wanted to play both when he came out of the Army, and when Branch Rickey wanted him to play baseball exclusively, Dick brought up Gene Conley, and he said that Conley is a substitute in basketball. You're going to be playing 40, 45 minutes in a game with the Pistons, and you're going to be playing 150 games a year for us. Well, he was a pitcher. Conley was a pitcher. So
yes, he was.
Yeah. So Groth said he went with baseball because that's where the money was, such as it was at that time.
I started to joke that he was an Israeli traveler. He and Pumpsy Green.
Yeah. And Peter Golenbach's new book, he released a book with about 17 or 18 of his interviews, and he does one with Gene Conley, and he discusses the whole Pumpsy Green thing.
Yes. Anything else you guys want to end on? I don't want to leave you hanging. Hal Bock.
No, I'm good. I'm still feeling warm and fuzzy about the Mets winning their first game against the Giants today, the doubleheader at City Field. They used the post runner. They used the post runner to win the game. The extra innings, so I'm still warm and fuzzy about that.
Okay, I'm still warm and fuzzy about your story with your dad. George Case III.
I do have one. Yeah, I've really enjoyed this. And Hal, I've got a question to ask you,
sure.
Not to belabor the point, but you talked about the mask that Jacques Plante wore. The masks that the hockey goalies wear today and the masks that the baseball catchers wear today, I believe they're all just one piece, aren't they? Where they used to have two pieces. One would be, in baseball, I know one was the helmet, and then they had the mask over the helmet.
I believe that's true. The mask that my son got was a one-piece mask, and
right.
it was fashioned after the mask that Plante wore. Plante wore that mask in Madison Square Garden, actually. He got hit in the face with a shot by Andy Bathgate, and he went into the dressing room. He was bleeding, and they had to stitch him up. And he was, at that time, he was at the top of his game. He was the best goalie in the league. And the coach of the Canadians came in to see how he was doing, and he said, "I'm not going back unless I wear the mask." And Toe Blake, who was the coach, was outraged because, this was breaking tradition. Goalies didn't wear masks in those days, but Plante was the best goalie in the league, and he set the rules. I'm going to go back, but I'm going to wear that mask. Now, what people don't know is that Plante, even though Plante was the first modern goalie to wear a mask, the mask had been worn in the 1920s by a guy named Clint Benedict, who played for a team called the Montreal Maroons. And he was the first goalie to wear a mask. So Plante, even though Plante gets credit for it, Plante really was not the first goalie. He was the second goalie to wear a mask in a game.
Whoa.
Well, you know what, Hal? That's really interesting, and I bring up because I'm not a hockey person. I mean, I enjoy watching it, but I don't know anything about the game and the equipment. But I do know something about baseball. And the fact is that when my dad played, and for many years, the catcher's mask, it was a two-piece. You had the mask, and then you put it over your hat or helmet or whatever. And you'd see a guy, at the plate or whatever, and you'd see the catcher throw his mask away, because he didn't want to have his view obstructed. And or if they're going for a foul pop-up, they would throw the mask away so they didn't trip over it. But it seems like today, the mask and the whole gear for the catcher is all one piece. And
it's become a helmet, really.
Right.
Most of the catchers wear what amounts to a helmet,
right?
Similar to a football player almost.
Yeah. Well, that's why I mentioned it, Hal. I caught one time. I was playing a recreation pickup game or something like that, and they said, we need a catcher. I said, I'll catch. I mean, what the hell? I knew how to play ball. I get behind the plate. I have a mask on. The foul tip comes, hit me in the Adam's apple. I said, that's the end of my catching career. I'm never going behind the plate again. So
I don't blame you.
Who was it? Mike Scioscia.
Batting helmets didn't come until the mid-'50s.
Yeah, Mike Scioscia invented a thing to prevent your Adam's apple from being hit.
They have a little bar or something over at the bottom of the mask, which they didn't.
It hangs down.
Yeah, right. Which they didn't have a long time ago. So right.
You know where that comes from? You know where that comes from? Steve Yeager, who was a catcher with the Dodgers.
Not Mike Scioscia. Yes.
No,
correct.
Steve Yeager got hit in the throat. He was in the on-deck circle, and he got hit by a splintered bat, and that was what led to the device hanging down from the mask.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, that's really interesting. I just had to bring it up because I've been thinking about it. When you brought up the hockey goalie mask situation, I related it immediately to the baseball catchers because that's what it looks like.
Sure.
Yeah,
Hal, your incredible mind, your incredible memory, and your incredible mind brings me to my most intense hatred for the rule that you and others like you lost your vote for the Hall of Fame just because of your age, not because you lost anything, you lost a step, whatever it was. And I know you have no animosity, that's the way it was, but as a fan, I would have enjoyed your vote rather than some 30-year-old who doesn't even remember Gil Hodges or Roy Campanella or anything of the sort. So that's my lifelong, intense hatred for those the powers that be, that brought it to that. And I know you're not gonna complain about it, but you and others like you who haven't lost anything should be voting. And that's my story. I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you, Hal.
I appreciate your support, believe me.
Yeah, I agree totally with Ralph.
Okay. My blood pressure just went up 10 points from that because I've been talking about this for 5 years with you, Hal, and you haven't lost a step from the 5 years ago when you hadn't lost a step. And so thank you for stepping up. How about that?
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I look forward to seeing David Hubler, or at least hearing David Hubler's voice, Friday, 6 Eastern Time. And I want to thank everybody for listening. It's the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. David Hubler, Alan Blumkin, George Case III, and Hal Bock. Adios, everybody. Happy trails.
Thank you for coming and drive home safely.
Good night, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.